In 2025, AI is increasingly able to predict mood patterns and subtly nudge behavior, and that changes the inputs to the happiness equation. Yet most of us still don't understand how happiness actually works. Gordat and his movement have reached tens of millions worldwide. Mo himself has cited numbers in the low tens of millions, and the idea has become a global conversation. We'll keep the big idea he taught, the math of happiness, but show 3 evidence-backed updates you can use today to actually feel it in 2025. And it starts with the unexpected story of where that equation came from. The journey to 100 million happier lives. It's remarkable to think that a single line of logic, first scribbled down by one man trying to survive the most devastating moment of his life, would one day be shared across so many borders and languages. The origin of Gordat's happiness equation wasn't in a book pitch, a keynote talk, or a research lab. It began alone in the aftermath of his son Ali's sudden death. In those first days, his thoughts felt painfully sharp, every memory weighted. The loss was permanent, but one question kept repeating in his mind. If I can't change reality, can I change how I view it? That question became the seed of the formula that would help him navigate the most difficult period of his life. At its core, it was brutally simple. How you feel is the gap between life's events and your expectations of them. At first, this wasn't something he talked about publicly, it was a tool for survival. But a simple idea that resonates has a way of spreading. A friend asked about it, then a colleague. When he eventually shared it more broadly, people from vastly different cultures recognized the same mental pattern in themselves. It didn't depend on cultural nuance or shared background. It spoke to the way every human mind reconciles the difference between what is and what we think should be. The movement built gradually. Mo's professional credibility played a role. A former chief business officer at Google X, he was used to engaging engineers, scientists, and innovators, not just audiences looking for self-help advice. That balance, part data, part human, meant his ideas reached people who might normally dismiss happiness talk as wishful or soft. Those who tested the approach, honestly comparing their reactions to actual events, often found themselves surprised at how much influence they could exert over their own baseline mood. Over time, his talks, books, podcasts, and media appearances carried the equation far beyond his own networks. Mo has spoken of tens of millions of people encountering the idea, with the ambition to reach far more. The scale was possible because the core message crossed demographics, platforms, and even ideologies. In places where mental health was rarely discussed, it could be presented as a rational thinking tool. Elsewhere, it became an anchor for therapy sessions and well-being workshops. But the context in which people were applying the equation was shifting. When Mo first wrote it, phones weren't yet claiming whole days by default, and AI hadn't entered everyday routines. The news cycle was intense, but not relentless in its reach. Between 2015 and 2025, both connection speed and expectation pressure accelerated. Through an always-on lens, people weren't just comparing their real-world lives to their friends. They were measuring them against curated feeds and algorithmically selected extremes that made the average feel inadequate. Researchers have been flagging patterns in certain groups living in this digital saturation. Multiple studies and public surveys, such as CDC Youth Tracking Data and Pew's work on teen social media use, show growing mental health concerns among those with heavy online exposure. Nearly 1 in 3 US high school students, for example, reports persistent feelings of poor mental health, and close to half of teens say they spend too much time on social platforms. Many researchers link part of this to constant comparison and the pressure of performing online. But the picture is nuanced. Large-scale reviews, like a Nature meta-analysis of social media abstinence, find mixed or no consistent effects, and cultural context plays a role in how these influences land. What emerges in the data is less a single cause and effect, more a set of mechanisms that can quietly alter the mental inputs in Mo's equation. Constant exposure to idealized moments can raise expectations without us registering it. Each time reality falls short of that adjusted bar, it creates a small gap, one that barely matters in isolation, but stacks up over days and weeks. In digitally saturated environments, those gaps can arrive in dozens a day. A peer's holiday post, a celebrity image enhanced beyond the possible, an AI-crafted ad suggesting what your best life should look like. By the time you've reframed one expectation, new ones have already taken its place. Against that backdrop, even the same idea that once felt like a life raft now operates in rougher waters. The formula is unchanged, but the rate at which its variables shift is far faster. In a rural community with less screen saturation, expectations around lifestyle, appearance, or achievement may change slowly. In a hyperconnected city, they can move by the hour. Managing the equation's expectations side is no longer something that happens naturally, it requires deliberate, repeated effort. That's part of why the equation's journey isn't just a story of audience growth, it's equally about adaptation. The principle still resonates with anyone who tries it, but context shapes both its effectiveness and the discipline needed to apply it. Some might be wrestling with social media envy, others with the background unease of an endless news feed, others still with the subtle tension of interacting with AI systems that remember personal details. In every case, the same mental levers, perception and expectation, are in play, only they're being nudged more often and more subtly than before. Seeing offline or low connectivity groups report stronger day-to-day satisfaction than digitally immersed peers doesn't mean a wholesale rejection of technology. It's a reminder that the tools we use can both connect and distort, and that in a world of industrial-scale expectation inflation, the equation's balance is harder to protect passively. The work of managing those inputs is active now. Failing to do it leaves the gap between events and expectations wide open to external control. Which brings us to the present. After years of crossing cultures and reaching tens of millions, the idea sits in a moment where its foundations still hold, but the environment pressing on them looks nothing like the one in which it was born. And the obvious question is whether the original form can operate under today's constant digital pressure, or if it needs an upgrade to match the climate. The happiness equation, recalculated for 2025. The recalculated version of the happiness equation starts from something simple. The logic still holds, but the way its parts behave in daily life has shifted. In Gordat's original framing, happiness equals your perception of life's events, minus your expectations of them. Today, a growing body of researchers, commentators, and mental health practitioners note that the expectations side is being distorted in ways most people never consciously register. The strongest driver, many argue, is the feedback loop of algorithmic curation, systems designed to show you whatever will keep you engaged, which often means serving you the most attention-grabbing, highly polished fragments of other people's lives. This is an interpretative update, not a universal law, but it's a useful lens for understanding how the equation plays out in 2025. If you integrate that lens, the formula becomes happiness equals perception of life's events, minus inflated expectations shaped by comparison culture. The key word is inflated. A grounded expectation matches the rhythm of an actual human life with its mix of highs, lows, and uneventful days. An inflated one is stitched together from curated moments, a luxury trip here, a cinematic apartment tour there, forming a false baseline with no gaps or imperfections. Measured against that, an ordinary day can feel like underperformance, even when nothing is wrong. Imagine your mind as a processing app. For most of our history, it took in a limited stream of events, compared them to what you thought might happen, and output a feeling. In recent decades, the incoming data has exploded. That app is now running constant comparisons in the background against hundreds of curated highlight reels every day. It wasn't built for this volume, which means more errors, unexplained dips in mood, slower recovery from disappointment, and a creeping sense of inadequacy that doesn't map to any real drop in how life is going. What's striking is that in many cases, the perception side of the equation isn't suffering in any obvious way. The coffee is still good, the weather still fits your plans, the people around you haven't changed, but the mental comparison engine is pulling in that stranger's sunset proposal video, or that acquaintance's artfully plated brunch, and using them as your reference points. The result is that your own perfectly fine moment feels like it's missing something. Bit by bit, that invisible adjustment raises the should in your expectations, widening the gap the equation measures and pushing happiness down. The difficulty is that most expectation inflation happens silently. People often resist the idea of lowering expectations because they equate it with dulling ambition or accepting mediocrity. In reality, it's more about rolling back the unnoticed creep, the accumulation of micro-comparisons layered into your mental baseline by constant exposure to other people's best 10 seconds of the day. You might think a quick scroll is harmless, but each pass adds tiny suggestions about what a normal day should look like. Addressing that inflation doesn't require a grand reset. It can start with small, targeted shifts in the sources of your inputs. Some health psychologists suggest framing this as a perception expectation audit, rather than a self-denial. The goal isn't to disconnect entirely, but to rebalance the amount of your daily attention that's captured by environments optimized for engagement rather than for accuracy. One way to test the effect is to run a personal experiment. Some small trials and self-reports have found that short, deliberate reductions in time spent on attention-engineered feeds, swapping one scrolling session for an offline activity, can improve mood for some people. However, large meta-analyses, including one published in Nature, show mixed results, with effects often depending on compliance levels and individual differences. Which is why it's safest to treat it as an experiment for yourself, not a guaranteed fix. The simplest version: for 1 week, identify a recurring 30-minute passive scroll window in your day, maybe before bed, over breakfast, or during your commute, and replace it with a different input. That could mean walking through a nearby green space, having a short conversation without devices in sight, or even doing a sensory check-in wherever you are. Notice 5 things you can see, 4 you can touch, 3 you can hear, 2 you can smell, 1 you can taste. Then pay attention to how your mood feels immediately after, and again at the end of the day. This way, you're actively narrowing the stream of inflated expectation material while feeding the perception side with more direct, personal inputs. Anchoring expectations in experiences that matter to you personally doesn't reduce ambition, it protects it from being distorted by false baselines. If your goals come from your own values and environment, they have a better chance of aligning with a life you can actually inhabit. When they're set by an endless reel of optimized glimpses into others' lives, they float just out of reach. Seen this way, the recalculated equation is not about fearing technology or resenting other people's good moments. It's about recognizing when the variables you're putting into your mental math are being skewed and consciously correcting for it. By managing the rate at which expectations get inflated, and by strengthening your own perception through present moment experiences, you can improve the balance without fundamentally changing the equation itself. What made Mo's original formulation so durable was its simplicity. Perception and expectation are both levers you can adjust. In 2025, one of those levers is being pulled constantly by forces outside your direct awareness. Recognizing the mechanism allows you to place your hand back on that control. A few intentional adjustments made consistently can narrow the gap and lift your baseline, even in a high-input environment. And while this update deals with the mental inputs we can consciously change, there's also another layer. Happiness isn't just a product of mental math, it's grounded in what's happening in the brain and body, often in ways we can now measure moment by moment. Understanding those patterns can reveal why certain changes, however small, have outsized effects and point to new tools for making joy more frequent. In 2025, those tools have become far more precise. The neuroscience of joy. Modern neuroscience is now giving us a clearer, more fine-grained look at what joy actually does in the brain. Researchers can map sub-second changes in activity across multiple regions and see how networks shift when a person experiences a rise in positive emotion. Labs can detect early neural signatures, patterns that tend to precede a conscious feeling of pleasure or contentment, and are experimenting with ways to feed that information back in real time. This isn't mind reading, and it's not infallible, but it does mean we can track how perception is built in the brain and observe how quickly joy can be disrupted and restored. At the center of these moments are 3 often named chemicals: dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin. Their roles are more about balance and timing than simply more is better. Dopamine signals that something desirable might be ahead. It's triggered by anticipation, a message notification, the scent of food pushing us to act. In a high-input digital environment, dopamine can be stimulated repeatedly without offering much lasting satisfaction, leaving us chasing the next hit. Serotonin supports mood stability. When it's steady, people tend to feel an even, content baseline rather than spikes of excitement. This stability makes it easier to enjoy day-to-day experiences without needing them to be extraordinary. It's influenced by light, movement, sleep, diet, and social interaction, meaning physical habits affect how likely we are to sustain a good mood. Oxytocin is linked to trust and bonding. It rises with genuine social connection, eye contact, physical touch, shared experiences. If dopamine draws us toward a pleasurable moment and serotonin steadies us within it, oxytocin helps turn it into a shared state. In person, that might come from a handshake or a meal. Online, those peaks are rarer and tend to be weaker. In most joyful experiences, these systems work together. A spark of amusement, dopamine, leads to a relaxed openness, serotonin, anchored by a sense of closeness if others are involved, oxytocin. This chain can happen in seconds. In offline exchanges, all 3 often appear, making the moment richer. Online, one link, usually dopamine, dominates, leaving the joy shallow and short-lived. What has changed by 2025 is how this interplay can be trained. Neurofeedback devices now use multiple sensors to monitor brain activity, blood flow, and subtle physiological shifts. The information is returned instantly through sounds, visuals, or gentle tactile cues. The aim is not just to spot joy, but to help people practice bringing those patterns online deliberately. In these sessions, a person might start by using an external prompt, a piece of music, a memory, to trigger a mild positive state. The system records the network activation that follows. Later, the user tries to evoke the same pattern without the external cue, guided by live feedback. Over repeated practice, the brain becomes more efficient at reaching that state on command, demonstrating neuroplasticity in action. This approach contrasts with older traditions, meditation, communal rituals, dance, which also conditioned positive states, but usually required months or years of repetition before results became reliable. Now, with consistent feedback, some people can shorten that learning curve markedly. The underlying mechanism is the same, linking certain sensory or thought inputs to a coordinated brain-body state associated with joy. The science isn't just experimental theory. Trials using transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS, have already shown measurable improvements in people with treatment-resistant depression. In one recent large study, participants receiving TDCS had higher rates of symptom improvement and recovery compared to those receiving sham treatment. While TDCS is still under clinical testing and not a universal solution, it supports the idea that targeted, repeated stimulation can shift brain states in lasting ways. Some of the strongest, most consistent lab-observed triggers for positive network synchronization are surprisingly ordinary. Laughter is a prime example. Recordings show that genuine laughter, especially when shared, creates a rapid alignment of activity patterns across both sides of the brain. Studies suggest that shared laughter can increase cooperation, feelings of trust, and even creative problem solving in groups. The effect is short-term but powerful, blending dopamine's spark with serotonin's calm and oxytocin's bond. Physically, laughter changes breathing, engages facial and core muscles, and alters heart rate variability, all of which feed signals back to the brain that reinforce the joyful state. Unlike a split-second dopamine hit from scrolling, laughter tends to create a small loop. Physical expression boosts neurochemical release, which strengthens the emotion, which in turn prolongs the laughter. Most people see laughter as spontaneous. The research suggests it could be used more deliberately. Setting aside time to watch something funny with another person or telling a shared-in joke can make positive states more accessible later. Even laughing alone, if it's genuine, appears to trigger much of the same neural synchrony. It's not yet an established clinical protocol, but as a mood maintenance practice, it shows promise and has almost no downside. Understanding this reframes the perception side of the happiness equation. Perception isn't fixed. It depends on which brain networks are already active when events occur. The same situation can feel neutral or positive depending on whether those joy-related patterns are switched on. If you've just had a shared laugh, a small annoyance may slide off. Without that priming, it might feel far more disruptive. The emerging science doesn't claim we can lock ourselves into joy indefinitely. It does show that joy is a fast, repeatable state that can be rehearsed. And because our brains adapt to practice, the more we trigger those networks intentionally, the easier they become to access. In day-to-day life, that means joy isn't only a byproduct of fortunate events. It's a trainable skill, influenced by habits that support the brain's chemistry and networks. Small, deliberate cues, a piece of music, a moment of humor, a purposeful social connection can make those states more frequent. The next question is how to integrate such practices into environments that don't naturally support them. Many people already think they're doing this with certain habits or trends, but the actual effect depends on whether the practice genuinely engages the brain's joy circuitry or merely offers a quick, surface-level hit. Gratitude, the 2025 upgrade. In 2025, gratitude is everywhere, at least on the surface. A quick glance through any platform brings up the familiar scenes. A glowing sunset tagged grateful, a latte art close-up tied to a morning gratitude ritual, or a perfectly arranged list of 3 things I'm thankful for set against ideal lighting. These posts can look uplifting, but much of the time they're designed to draw attention rather than create the deep emotional shifts that actually turn gratitude into a stabilizing force. Neuroscience tells us that the brain processes this differently. It's like taking in a quick hit of sugar instead of sitting down for a real meal. The sensation is there, but it's fleeting and does little to nourish the systems that keep happiness steady. That doesn't mean public expressions of gratitude have no value. Visible displays can encourage prosocial norms, reminding people to notice good things in their own lives, prompting conversations, or motivating someone else to try a gratitude habit for the first time. But if the main driver is audience approval, the practice leans heavily on dopamine spikes without strongly engaging the serotonin and oxytocin systems that underpin long-term mood stability. Many therapists in 2025 now advise keeping at least one gratitude practice completely offline and entirely for yourself. When the brain knows a moment is private, the emotional processing tends to be deeper and less vulnerable to performance pressure or social comparison. Some of the strongest evidence for small but meaningful gratitude interventions comes from large-scale programs like the Big Joy Project. In that initiative, over 17,000 participants took on short, 5 to 10 minute daily gratitude or joy exercises for 1 week. The results were notable. Many reported improvements in mood, lower perceived stress, and a greater sense of agency, effects that were particularly strong among participants who faced economic or social disadvantages. This kind of data reinforces that even tiny, repeated shifts in attention can create measurable well-being gains, especially when the practice is consistent. One way practitioners have adapted this insight is through micro-gratitude exercises. These focus on small, specific, and immediate experiences. The exact tone of your friend's laugh mid-conversation, the feel of warm cup against your skin, the smell of rain on pavement. You hold that detail in attention, not for minutes on end, but about 60 seconds, long enough for the sensory and emotional systems to cooperate in reinforcing it. The process interrupts autopilot thinking, slows you down for just long enough to encode the experience, and over time, raises the baseline frequency of positive perception in daily life. Instead of a catch-all like "I'm grateful for my health," the focus is on precision and sensory anchoring, which the research shows has more staying power. Building on this approach, gratitude stacking has emerged as a practical upgrade for 2025. It deliberately layers different modes of processing, sensory immersion, a brief written note, and a micro-meditation inside a short, uninterrupted burst. The timing matters. The whole stack runs 90 to 120 seconds from start to finish, short enough to fit naturally into unpredictable modern routines. It starts with the sensory anchor, noticing the weight of your blanket, the taste of fresh bread, or the sound of leaves moving outside a window, and holding that sensation in focus for around 10 to 15 seconds. Without losing that awareness, you write a single sentence explaining why that moment feels valuable right now. The language matters. It's less effective if you fall into overused or vague phrases. Finally, you close your eyes or keep them soft-focused, and sit with the combined sensory and verbal image in mind for another half-minute. What you've done in that short span is tie one experience to 3 reinforcing channels: sensory perception, written language, and contemplative recall. The impact lies in activating these systems back to back. Sensory awareness lights up perception and memory circuits. The act of writing engages language areas and executive function, while the reflective pause recruits networks linked to personal meaning. Together, they leave a stronger neural trace, one that's easier to recall and emotionally re-engage with later, even without the original stimulus present.